Welcome to Global Risk Community Chat. Today our guest is Salih Islam. He's actually our first guest of Global Risk Community Chat, so he has a very special place for our podcast and our community. So I'm very happy to have you here again, Salih. Welcome.
Yeah, good to be here again after almost a year. Good to be with you again. Nice having chat with you.
Yes. So for our listeners that may not have listened to your first podcast, can you briefly introduce yourself again?
Sure. I'm 53 years old. After studying political science and international relations at university, I did my MBA in Istanbul, Turkey. Then my adventure in the private sector began. First, I started my career as auditor in Arthur Andersen. Then I worked in the Turkey's dominant sectors such as textile, iron and steel, construction, and petroleum. I worked for a short period of time for non-audit position in an FMCG firm in Egypt. I worked as a finance manager there. Finally, for the last 10 years, I'm still working in the audit department of a large retail group operating all over the world in a global sense, which is Group Rocher. That's it. If I want to state it briefly and as a summary.
It sounds good. Thank you so much. I think it was super clear. So what topic you would like to share with us today?
Today, I want to talk about fraud because it's a big subject of my profession. I'm an internal auditor, so part of my area of expertise is fraud. I want to talk about today how to detect and prevent fraud in an organization, in a company. I want to talk about that in a brief sense. I want to talk about some key points about preventing and detecting fraud in an organization.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Also, as far as I know, right now, as of our recording, it is Fraud Prevention Awareness Week. So it is actually a very relevant topic for our current weeks or month. So then let's jump into it. So what are some key things when it comes to fraud prevention?
Sure. Fraud is usually done in secret or try to be hidden in the companies. It may remain undetected for a while. Often, a fraudster does not come into direct contact with the victim. Like I said, it's hidden. I always give an example in my webinars. A bank robber uses force and threatens when he robs a bank. But a fraudster, usually a bank employee, steals money from the bank and tries to cover it up. That's the difference between a bank robber and the fraudster who works for a bank. So, in general, fraud is a black hole for all the companies in the world. According to the statistics, around 5% of the revenues earned by the companies goes to fraud. This affects the profits of the companies very negatively. So in general, companies do not take precautions or preventive measures before they face fraud in general. So today we want to talk about how to detect and prevent fraud in the companies. Of course, it is important to detect fraud in the companies, but more importantly, it is to prevent the fraud before it happens. In other words, we should make the fraudster's job very difficult in order for them to commit fraud. Companies should be alerted for the fraud risks on this manner. So if I want to give some statistics about fraud, according to the estimates by ACFE, ASVFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which are experts in occupational fraud in this manner, only in the United States alone may exceed $900 billion annually, the occupational fraud volume. If we add together the other fraud aspects like check and credit card fraud, securities fraud, total fraud number will be 10% of global economic output. So this means trillions of dollars globally, which is huge number. So it's a huge problem. So how are we going to stop it? There is a simple formula to be told. We have a formula to prevent fraud in the companies with three basic strategies. Of course, we cannot reduce the fraud to zero, but we will mitigate the risk as much as we can. Because as long as there is a human being in somewhere, you cannot reduce it to zero. There will be some part of fraud in every company, but it will be tolerable, or it will be risk is how do you call, risk is mitigated that time. So in my opinion, these are the three fundamental elements of fighting fraud, the three basic strategies, which are, one of them is internal control, the other one is internal audit, and the third one is ethic lines. I always say these are the three main fundamental elements. First, let's talk about internal control. First thing we have to do, we have to set up an internal control system in the company to prevent and detect fraud. So in all the business processes of the company, we should put some control points. That is the first thing we have to do. This action makes the fraudster's job very difficult for detection and prevention. This is the first basic thing we have to do. What is the meaning of it? Let me explain a little bit. We have to set up policies and procedures. Simply, these are the rules of the company, policies and procedures. And in those policies and procedures, we have to mention segregation of duties, authorizations, thresholds for each level of the organization. And we should also define conflict of interest, code of conduct, code of ethics, etc. All of these control points will make the fraudster's job very difficult. So first thing we have to do is internal control, set up an internal control. Yeah. So, okay, the second one is internal audit, of course. A strong internal audit function is a deterrent force in front of the fraud. So also internal audit can tell you that internal control, whether it is working effectively or not. So internal audit is the second thing we have to do. We have to establish either externally or as a service, or internal audit as a employee of the company. So we have to set up internal audit staff because they are experienced enough to detect and prevent fraud. So third one, to use your time properly. Third step is the important as the previous ones. This is the ethic lines. Maybe it is the most important one. So we should set up an ethic line in the company. We know that statistically, the whole of half of the fraud cases in the world are detected and discovered by the ethic lines. So in order to have an effective ethic line, we should train all the employees about it and encourage them to talk if they see something unethical around them. So also the right tips should be rewarded by the company management in order to prevent fraud. The thing we have to do is in-house seminars, trainings from time to time in order to get awareness is very important. One of the other important elements about fraud cases is the behaviors of the company's upper management. For example, they should be clear, like black and white. If a fraud case comes to their desk, in general, especially in our culture in Middle East, we see that many of the fraud cases, after the fraud and fraudster detected and reported, they were only dismissed from their positions and cut their ties with the company. So that's all. However, they should be prosecuted by court in order to be set an example to the rest of the employees. So this should be done too. So these are in summary, the three basic things we should state in order to prevent fraud or set up a fraud prevention mechanism in companies. First of all, internal control. The other one is internal audit and the ethic lens. These are the three deterrent forces to prevent fraud.
Thank you for sharing that as well. I hear that there's a lot to do for companies actually to also be more active against fraud prevention. So seeing that there are so many of them, I want to ask one last question. So if you were to give one takeaway point to our viewers that they can start implementing right away, you know, tomorrow they go to their works and start implementing, what would that be?
Uh, one takeaway is very difficult to tell, but I should give recommendation to all the listeners of this interview. There is a very important step for the companies to take: the tone at the top. I mean, the upper management, the executive board, and the bosses of the companies are important. Their approach to fraud is also very important. If they do what professional advise them to do, everything will be fine.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So unfortunately, we have run out of our time for today. So I want to thank you so much for joining again once again, and hopefully we will see you in another session later as well.
Of course, Ece. Thank you very much for having me, and it was a pleasure to be here again, once again. Thank you very much.
Likewise, thank you. Have a great day.
Bye bye.